Good morning, this is Hasnain Shah, Managing Partner Xecofy. Today we are with Bob Ferguson, who is communication expert at Xecofy, who is also 3 times UK and Ireland speech championship winner. Bob, how are you?
I'm good, thank you very much. And it's always a great pleasure to come and talk about my book, of course.
So today we're going to talk about your latest book called Great Technical Speaking. It is not rocket science. Tell us a little bit about your new book, Bob.
Okay, so there's a great demand for technical speakers to improve their communication skills. And this is not a new thing. I think it's been going on since I left university. And I thought that things might have improved over time, but it seems that it really hasn't. We've got people in organisations who are incredibly bright and intelligent, and they've got these wonderful ideas, but they're not always good at putting the ideas over. And so unfortunately the people who make the decisions, the people who invest the monies in the business, don't get those ideas and don't get to use them. So you see it in a number of effects really. Firstly, companies lose technical competitive advantage because those ideas aren't coming to the top of the organisation, and some bright ideas slip by, and then other organisations get them and take that leap ahead. So they're losing competitive advantage. But they're also throwing away a huge amount of money because technical people have a desire to overwhelm their audience with detail. And that generally stretches out the length of most meetings. And I can tell you in the UK alone that we waste £28.6 billion every year in wasted time in meetings, and that's just a huge loss. And the third thing is that the management don't end up making the most effective decisions because they haven't received the right level of information from their technical experts. So, and this is very common in a lot of technical organisations, that the information dilutes as it goes up the organisation, and so people can't make effective decisions with it. So the book is aimed at that. The book has 2 parts really. The first bit talks about the challenges for technical speakers, why we should be investing the time and effort to make them better communicators. The second part of the book is full of techniques that people can use to improve their communication skills and help them present better and get the right level of information.
Excellent. So when you talk about organizations facing these challenges, did you learn these yourself when you were engaging with the organization as a speech expert, communication expert, or have you faced it as a challenge when you were working somewhere in your own professional life?
Yeah, for sure it was a challenge for me, because I can tell you that I detested public speaking in the 1990s, and I had to do something to improve it, and I did, but as I improved it, it became more and more noticeable to me how organisations struggled. So most of my work was as an engineer in the space industry, working on deep space missions largely. So my pride and joy at the moment is Bepi Colombo, which is circling Mercury, waiting to go into orbit.
Okay.
But there was all this wonderful technical talent around me, and I could see people struggle. They used to come to see me. Unfortunately, some of them came to see me after they'd been for the bid process and been turned down for money. But what they would do is they would go for a bid process and they wanted to get funding for their latest project, and they'd be given 5 or 10 minutes to talk, and they'd go in armed with 50 slides and wonder why people turn them down, because they weren't getting the essence of the communication over. So increasingly I spent my time both internally in engineering and externally with people who knew me by reputation because of the speech championships, coaching others into how to communicate effectively. And then it just grew organically. And when I finished the last major project I worked on, which was the new European Mars rover, when I'd finished that, I thought, well, I've got so much coaching work and training work to do that if I don't do this full time now, I probably never will. So I took the plunge and went out, and I have to say I love it as much as I loved engineering. I did enjoy engineering, but I love this as well. There's a great sense of achievement in seeing people develop and being able to get their point over with clarity and impact.
Excellent. So when you were working yourself, I believe, have you always been this effective communicator and a speech expert and a communication expert yourself? Was there a time in your life that you also struggled in speaking, in public speaking?
Yeah, sure. I said the early 90s, I detested public speaking. I went to a wonderful organisation called Toastmasters International. And for anyone who wants to improve their speaking, it's a great organisation to go to. And initially, my focus was just like everyone who goes there. I wanted to be a better speaker. In fact, I just wanted to be confident in front of an audience. I wanted to stop that feeling of being terrified when you stood up to speak. But I found quite quickly that those feelings ebbed away and that I didn't mind standing in front of an audience. And then I could focus on improving the standard. And one of the best mechanisms Toastmasters has for improving speaking is the competitions that they run twice a year. And so I was encouraged to enter those, and after a year or two I found I was doing quite well in them. And that sort of picks up the pace because you get more interested because you can see the progress you're making.
Excellent.
And that ended up with me at my first UK and Ireland Championship, which was the international, took me to America to compete in the World Public Speaking Championships.
Nice.
And then afterwards I picked up evaluation because I think the art of giving feedback effectively is really important in business. And the last one I did is humour. And humour doesn't always seem one of those things that would be important for a business speaker to learn. But it's a great mechanism if it's well used for oiling the wheels of communication.
Right.
It can help audiences relax when they hear a little bit of humour injected. You're not there as a stand-up comedian, you're not there just to crack jokes, but if you can introduce appropriate humour, you'll find it just makes the passage really easier.
Nice.
But speaking is a bit like music. The more you learn, the more you find there is to learn. And so it's 27 years now since I joined Toastmasters. I'm still in the organisation, I'm still learning, and the challenge with communication is it never stands still. So what I learnt in the late 90s is being superseded now, because in the late 90s I didn't even have a mobile phone, let alone a smartphone. The mobile phone was a brick in those days, and you had to lug it around. Now, of course, we've all got these smartphones. We've got good video cameras on every phone, so people can take their own videos. People love to watch videos far more than they ever did. If you watched a video in my day, you got it from Blockbuster or something like that, and it was always a full feature film. But nowadays, people are popping up, it doesn't matter where they are, they go for a walk somewhere, they take a video of themselves, they put it on TikTok or LinkedIn or YouTube or something like that.
Indeed,
So the world of communication is very different now to when I started.
Indeed.
And I think that's what keeps making it stimulating, so that you learn new techniques to fit in with the new patterns of communication.
Great. I couldn't agree more with you, because is this book equally applicable to people in the UK, in corporate organizations here, as well as it is on anywhere else in the world? For example, the third world countries like Pakistan or India, for that matter. Yeah,
for sure. The basic principles are applicable worldwide. They don't change much, but there are nuances and changes. So you'll find different cultures and different natural styles of communication. So I've had a wonderful time visiting Pakistan, and it's been a joy to go there. But when you listen to people communicate in Pakistan, often that communication is a lot faster than you would hear in the UK. And so there's a different style needed to encourage people to put perhaps more pauses in to relax, because when you're speaking fast, your audience don't get the chance to listen and process what you've said. So the pauses are really important. And if you've got a natural culture where everyone talks fast and everyone jumps into every gap, then that doesn't happen. So if you want to get your point over, it's a change in style. But also in culture, I've noticed that often in Pakistan, Asian countries, that there's a lot more respect down the organisation for the seniors than sometimes there is in European companies.
Right. Okay.
And what that means is that the people in European companies are often a lot more willing to express their viewpoints if they think the management needs something drawn to its attention.
Right.
But in Asian countries, that doesn't always happen because people think, well, it's not my place to be criticising and handing up information up the chain.
Indeed.
And so sometimes that makes it harder to encourage people to bring their bright ideas forward and say what they think could be improved in the organisation. Whereas I think in Europe, there is a more natural progression for that to happen.
Right. So how do you see the world has changed from that point onwards till now, after COVID, now that pandemic has subsided a bit, and now the companies are opening up, and now they are using hybrid style of organization, style of working.
Yeah.
Some of them are working from home. So most of them in those countries, even in Pakistan, are using now the hybrid model, where some days in the week they come to the office and otherwise they work from home.
Yeah.
So how effective is this module that you're offering, your communication expertise now, to them in this context, the new context?
Yeah, okay. So if I can just pick up on one of the things you talked about, the open workshop we did for the heads of companies.
Exactly.
Which, although did cover some of the principles of great technical speaking, was mainly focused on storytelling, because it's a skill and technique that both technical people and managers don't use as effectively as they could. Storytelling has become incredibly important ever since the mid-1990s.
Right, okay.
When we started to realise that people make decisions emotionally rather than factually. So we need both facts and emotion, because people will buy an emotion but justify on facts. So you can't do without one of them. It's not a question of just trying to carry people with emotion, but they need that emotion in order to reach the decision. And so it was helping leaders use emotion in a better way in order to get their message over. And one of the key areas you can see this now is vulnerability. In the storytelling model, when the hero becomes vulnerable, when they're at their lowest ebb, is when we feel more empathy for them. We develop more empathy with people in times of adversity, not times of triumph. And now you will see it. If you look at CEOs speaking, you'll see they're showing far more vulnerability, and that's to respond to that point so that they can get a better connection with their audience. So the storytelling was a really important part of the teaching that we were doing. That is equally important now, because what's happened, as the question you asked about how communication has changed with the hybrid model, is people have become more and more used to using cameras.
Indeed.
And speaking to cameras and being on Zoom or Teams or whatever they use. And as a result of that, we spend more time sat in front of a screen than we do sat face to face like we are. And that gives a different level of connection. So there are a couple of things we need to remember about the hybrid model. Is when I talk in the great technical speaking model, and you'll see it, that I encourage people to split up their content into short blocks. And short blocks are incredibly important for retaining attention.
Right.
So that we need to listen, and then we need to have a break in subject, and it keeps people's attention pinged back to the top. If you look now, people's attention span is getting shorter.
Shorter and shorter.
And so we need to learn to break up meetings to keep people involved. Otherwise, you find that they've got email and other things around the screen, and that will start to become their focus. And the second thing we need to do is involve people with stories so that they get emotionally connected to what's being said. And you can still do that in a very short segment. You don't need to tell a story over a long period. I think one of the third things that's probably missing now we're in a hybrid model is what was called water cooler moments or coffee moments. So if you were in a team and you were working with people, you go and make yourself a cup of coffee, and while you were stood there, you'd see somebody who's working on a different project, and you'd have a casual conversation, and ideas would bounce around, or someone would have a problem and they say, oh, you know, I'm struggling with this, and you'd answer that. And because video meetings tend to be very agenda driven, we've got our agenda, we'll go through that. We've lost that social interaction that we would get at a coffee machine. So I think if you are going to have a group that meets in a hybrid model, that they're connecting on Zoom, it's important that you give them 10 minutes before, say get in the room 10 minutes before and just chat about what you're doing, and leave the room open for a little while afterwards so they can catch up with one another. Otherwise that social interaction fades away.
Right.
And that makes the team much weaker.
Makes sense. Thank you very much. So another question I have related to your book is, who is the target audience? Are these the head of the organizations? Are these the managers who are running the technical teams, or the team members themselves?
Right. It has a bit for both groups, but both the management group and the technical experts. But in fact, communication in an organisation is a team effort. So it's no good saying I'm going to teach the technical experts to communicate effectively, and they go in and present to the management, and then the management say, well, that's not actually what I want. This is a continuous loop. The management should be as active in helping technical experts present the right information as the technical experts should be active in trying to develop the right techniques in order to present the best information to the management structure.
Right, okay.
And so both parts are involved, both parts are responsible. And if you've got poor communication, say quite often I get called in and people say, I need you to train my technical staff. And I say, what's the problem? And nearly always the problem hinges around poor use of PowerPoint. And I look at that and I say, well, what are you going to say when I tell your people to stop using PowerPoint? And they say, oh, you can't do that. That's the way we do things here. So I say, well, the problem's not them, it's you. You're forcing them to communicate in a poor way.
Indeed.
So it does take both ends of the organisation, the technical end and the management end, have to work together to get the best results out of the organisation.
Indeed. And I was going to ask you about that PowerPoint example. So when people, how do they distinguish between you and somebody who coaches them, trains them on a specific tool, for example, PowerPoint or Microsoft Word, and they also consider themselves as communication expert?
Right.
How do you differentiate from those people? Is there any differentiation, or is it the same?
There is for certain a difference. You can't stop people who validly say they're a communication expert because they work in a branch of it. But I'm looking at it from a systemic viewpoint. So this is a top-down approach. This is looking at communication within the organisation and picking the tools, the right tools, to help the flow of information up and down the organisation effectively. So this is a cultural tool, if you like, cultural communication. And that's really important because it's often the culture of an organisation that drags it down and slows the information flow down and makes it less effective. So all those people rightly call themselves communication experts, but what they're doing is focusing on one tool. But rarely is the problem the tool. You know, the problem with PowerPoint is not PowerPoint. PowerPoint is a powerful tool and can be used really well to support a presentation. But poor use of PowerPoint is the problem. What I like to call the paralysis of PowerPoint. That's what people do. They paralyse their audiences and they paralyse the organisation through poor use of PowerPoint. So this is not about the techniques of how should I show the slides, how many words should I put on the slide, and by the way the answer is 0. But it's not about answering those questions and not about morphing between slides and making it look whizzy. It's about understanding what your purpose is. And I would say to people, you need 2 things in order to communicate effectively. You need a target audience, you need to know and understand who you're speaking to and what they want, and you need a purpose. What is the reason for your presentation? And without either of those things, you fail. You're guaranteed to fail.
Right. Yeah, that's very important. So as I understand, I mean, we have already heard a lot, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you talked about culture and you talked about top-down model. So have you also engaged with heads of organizations and tried to improve their communication as well? Or it's mostly for the teams and the team heads?
No, surely for heads of organisations, often they want to polish their skills, they want to put over their message more effectively. And quite often nowadays, one of the big words in organisations is engagement. CEOs want to engage with the people in their organisation, but they'll never do it through the facts of the organisation. And I've worked in some big engineering companies, and they send out newsletters or monthly briefings, and it's full of this has happened and that has happened, and the emotion of what's happened is completely lost.
Indeed. Yeah.
So working with senior staff, it's about helping them relate to the people who work for them, understand what's the passion that's driving the organisation, what they're trying to achieve. And when you're in a big organisation, it's really easy to think you're just doing a day job. And the big organisations make it easy for people to think they're just doing a day job. So if you're sat on the floor as an engineer, and the person sat next to you is an engineer doing the same job, and the person sat behind you is an engineer doing a day job, it's very easy for you to think you're just another engineer doing a bit of work for that day.
Right.
But when you see the impact that these people have on the end result,
Indeed.
it's a motivating feeling.
Indeed.
And you can see that if you look at the big projects. Recently, NASA landed a rover on Mars. And if you were watching the control room when they landed, the joy there is in the room, but there are thousands of people who contributed to that.
Indeed.
But they should be sharing that joy as well.
Yes.
So it's about driving the emotion down the organisation. And yes, to come back to your original question, that's what I work with CEOs, not just technical level speaking, not just the mechanics of speaking better, but the way you get your message over so that the people down the organisation feel the same excitement that you do.
Fascinating. I think I couldn't agree more on this, because I feel that purpose is very important and critical for any organization and anything that you do, and it has to come from the CEO or the head of the organization, and there's nothing more impactful than CEO directly communicating the message to the teams. So Bob, what is the value that the organizations can get out of this book?
Right. Well, the book is really just a starting place for them. The purpose behind writing the book is so that people can read it fairly quickly. It's not too onerous. They can get a really good idea about the challenges that technical communication can bring, and some bright ideas about how they can improve it. But the book is really a condensed version of the communications program, the Great Technical Speaking Communications program, which of course we successfully run out with its hybrid model. Now we do it in a blended learning format, so that there's pre-work to do so that people are up to speed when they come onto the Zoom calls. Then we do the interactive training, and then they have some homework. That's my favourite bit. I like to give them homework to do to make sure that they go away and embed these ideas in their behaviour, because ultimately this is about changing behaviour in the organisation. But it has to apply at all levels. So for me, it always works best if you're discussing what the programme will do with senior management. And then when they buy in to the fact that this will be a change in behaviour, then we can affect the technical expertise to make sure that they're using the right techniques to get their message up the organisation. As I said before, without both ends working together, it won't work. It's not just one of these programs where people say, oh, can you just train our people with a few presentation skills? because that won't improve the situation.
Right. Excellent. So thank you very much, Bob, for your time.
Pleasure.
And I look forward to launching your program about great technical speaking for organizations in various organizations, for various corporate organizations. And I hope that they can learn from all your expertise and your experience. Thank you so much, viewers. So we talked about, we sat with Bob Ferguson today, and we discussed his new book, Great Technical Speaking, It's Not Rocket Science. So I hope that you enjoyed our conversation. If you liked the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Xecofy channel so that you continue to get similar useful content in the future. Thank you very much.